When billionaires talk, people listen. And when those billionaires back up their predictions with million-dollar bets, the world goes into an absolute frenzy. And that's what's happened this week as Balaji Srinivasan has came out and publicly announced that he believes the United States is about to enter hyperinflation, and that is going to send Bitcoin to $1 million before June 2023. Naturally, a lot of people are skeptical. A lot of people have dismissed these claims of hyperinflation, but Balaji isn't the only billionaire talking about such things. We have other names such as Paul Tudor Jones, Carl Icahn, and of course, Jack Dorsey, all talking about the fragility in the banking system and whether we could, in fact, see hyperinflation. And the reason we're doing another video on Balaji and hyperinflation is because the everyday person loses 99% of their net worth. 99% of their savings and time can be wiped out in the matter of days, okay? Because hyperinflation happens really quickly, as we're about to find out. Okay, so the technical definition of hyperinflation is prices rising by 50% per month. And hyperinflation has happened to lots of different countries all around the world recently. Obviously, Venezuela, Zimbabwe, Lebanon, etc. The list goes on. But the most common one that people talk about is what happened in Germany exactly 100 years ago in 1923. You can see what happened to a price of a loaf of bread in Germany, okay? In 1918, it was 1 mark. In November 1922, only 4 years later, that same loaf of bread was 163 marks, okay? And then only 1 year later, the same loaf of bread was 1.5 million marks. No, that is not a typo, that is correct. And then only 2 months later, in November of 1923, that same loaf of bread was worth 200 billion German marks. So in the space of only 5 years, all of your life savings are absolutely useless. Even if you had $200 billion of wealth in 1918, you couldn't buy a loaf of bread only 5 years later. And that's interesting because the world's richest man today has around $200 billion to their name. Obviously, that being Elon Musk and co. So what would happen if we had hyperinflation in 5 years? Would it look like Elon Musk not being able to afford a loaf of bread in 5 years? Potentially. I'm not saying that's going to happen, but this is just how much of a dramatic shift hyperinflation is, okay? And Balaji, our good friend Balaji, posted this chart in one of his great tweet threads this week. And you can see here, what he has highlighted in red is the time required for prices to double in lots of previous hyperinflationary events. So you can see here in Hungary in 1945, it only took 15 hours for the price of things in the economy to double, okay? That's ridiculous. Imagine going to the local coffee store in the morning, you pay $5 for a coffee, and then 15 hours later, let's say you go get a coffee hit at 8 p.m. at night, well, that same cup of coffee has now doubled in price, okay, in the space of 1 day. Obviously, something similar in Zimbabwe, prices would double every 24 hours. Yugoslavia, that's where actually I'm from, prices used to double every 1.4 days in the 1990s, so it's no surprise that families like mine wanted to get out of Yugoslavia, not just because of the whole communist regime that was going on there, but because of the economic damage that we felt in Yugoslavia. I don't have the time to look at all of the examples in this chart, but I would encourage you to go and read Balaji's tweet. It's very interesting, and it's showing many different hyperinflationary examples from all around the world in all decades throughout the 20th century and even the 18th century in France. Because lots of people say, oh, but it's only happened in Zimbabwe or Venezuela or Germany 100 years ago, and that's not the case. Hyperinflation is an exponential trend, and it happens very quickly and very rapidly. And in the West, we suffer from our recency bias. We haven't seen hyperinflation in our lifetimes, so we don't expect it to occur. Our brains have been biologically evolved to think in these linear terms, okay? And when we hear warnings from people telling us that things are about to change in a dramatic fashion, we tend to not listen, okay? Even if those warnings are coming from some of the world's biggest billionaires, and that's what we're seeing today. And obviously, Balaji is only the most recent billionaire to be warning about hyperinflation. Funny enough, this is actually the banner over on his Twitter profile, and it's worth checking out. So the banner points out the Fed's new $2 trillion backstop, which of course, our good friend Jerome is calling not QE once again. And it also has 5 bullet points here on the side. It says, it's happening now, it'll be fast, that's the key point, Buy Bitcoin, get your coins off exchanges, and send the bit signal. Obviously, we talked about what the bit signal was in our video earlier this week. Again, I'd recommend you go check that out. But it's all about waking up the people who are unaware of what's happening. But Balaji was just the most recent billionaire. We also had Jack Dorsey come out in 2021, and he absolutely blew up the internet. When he tweeted this out, it said, hyperinflation is going to change everything. It's happening. Full stop. That's it. That's all he said over on Twitter. And obviously, you should have saw what it did to the Google Trends, okay, for the word hyperinflation. That absolutely blew up to levels that we haven't seen before, okay? So obviously, Jack Dorsey's got a pretty big following. I think he has 4 million followers on Twitter, and he's obviously the creator of Twitter and Square. So when billionaires like Jack talk, people wake up. And obviously another billionaire who's kind of been warning about hyperinflation and high inflation is Carl Icahn. Okay, this man has a $27 billion net worth, and he came out in 2022 and he said, the worst is yet to come. And he said the inflation in the US right now is actually warning him that the US empire could fall the same way the Roman Empire fell some 2,000 odd years ago. I obviously disagree with this take. I'm actually bullish on the US as a country, as a whole. I'm bullish on them economically, geographically, and geopolitically, but that is for a whole nother video. I just wanted to point that out because Icahn is another superstar in the game. Another superstar in the game of economics is, of course, hedge fund giant Elliott, and they came out and they said that looming hyperinflation could lead to a global societal collapse. Obviously, that's a little bit more of a doomer take than I would prefer to put out there, but again, these guys have $70 billion of assets under management, and I'm just kind of showing you what these billionaires are saying, even if I disagree, because people really are not paying attention to what is occurring around the world and what these billionaires are saying. And of course, we've got Paul Tudor Jones as well. He's got a $7 billion net worth. He didn't say that we would see hyperinflation, okay? He just said, look, we're probably going to go through a period of sustainably higher inflation. And he thought Bitcoin was the fastest horse to win that race of outpacing inflation. So of course, what are these billionaires looking at? Why do they think that we're close to hyperinflation? Because most people think the only way you can get hyperinflation is through government printing too much money, okay? That's what most people think. And most people think, oh, you know, central banks around the world are at least trying to raise interest rates and slow their pace of money printing. We can't really see hyperinflation, but that's not true, okay? There's lots of other ways you can get hyperinflation. So obviously we'll first look at the money supply of various different central banks. So if we're going to analyze whether we are going to see hyperinflation or not, I want you guys to think, which of these 5 points do you think that we're seeing around the world today, okay? Are we ticking the boxes of hyperinflation? So obviously, government overprinting money. I'll throw up a couple of charts that kind of say, yes, the government is printing too much money. 2, rapid increase in money supply. We've seen that all around the world, highlighted by these charts. Number 3, a loss of confidence in the economy. Now, this is a very interesting one. You have people like JP Morgan saying there's going to be a 100% chance of a recession. And we have Google search trends again. We can have a look here at the search term bank run, and you can see it is going absolutely exponential to levels we haven't seen in years and years and years. We're reaching levels that are actually far higher than what we saw in the early 2020. And obviously, if you do remember back 3 years, people were very worried about bank runs in early 2020, okay? There were fears that the banks would shut down, but the fears today surrounding the largest banks in America and all around the world looking a little bit shaky. That people are far more scared. They're losing confidence in the system, and they're Googling bank run. How do I protect myself? Okay, so yes, all those first 3 points, we have them. Number 4, a decrease in the supply of goods and services in the economy. We actually don't have this yet. Obviously, some of the lockdown shenanigans in early 2020 is a sign of this, but also in hyperinflationary events, typically you will see a country have its productive base shrink, okay? Producers just tend to not be able to afford the very expensive inputs that is required for the manufacturing process. of various different goods and services. And typically, with hyperinflationary events, you also get increasingly tyrannical governments the worse the currency debasement becomes. Okay, and that obviously makes it far more harder if you're a businessman and you're seeing increasing laws and regulations being pushed down upon you. The most popular, of course, being price controls. We could probably spend a whole video talking about price controls, but we're going to talk about that in another one. And the fifth and the final cause of hyperinflation is wars and political instability. So ask yourself today, do you think you've seen a little bit of political instability in your local government? And we certainly have seen wars all around the world, and they are very inflationary. So maybe the billionaires around the world are just simply looking at the 5 causes of hyperinflation, and they're saying, hey, look, we probably ticked the box on at least 4 out of those 5 causes. Maybe now is the time to be very cautionary. And now we should probably actually talk about how we protect ourselves. Okay, so I don't actually think we're going to see hyperinflation in the next 90 days like Balaji thinks. I think it's a probability, and I think it's probably a higher probability than most people think, but I think in the next 90 days it's pretty extreme. Yes, it's good to be on the lookout, and yes, it's always good to prepare, which is why I'm making this video, so you guys can at least think about ways you should be preparing. But like it is, if you all know the old saying, okay, you buy fire insurance before your house catches fire. So how do you protect yourself, and how should you prepare, okay? I believe things are going to get very volatile, not just in financial markets, but obviously in terms of society as well. So in terms of financial markets, this example here from the German Weimar hyperinflation is a very popular one. It's actually measuring the percentage change in gold on a monthly basis. That is the red line, okay? You can see the price of gold is actually the black line, and you can see it pretty much just goes up and to the right between 1914 and 1923. In that 9-year period, it went from pretty much 1 German mark to 1 trillion. But despite the price of gold going absolutely parabolic during those 7 years, it saw many very, very large 70% drawdowns in its price when you're denominating that gold in the debasing, very volatile German mark. Okay, you can actually see here on the chart, on 7 occasions, the gold saw a correction bigger than 70% during those 7 years. So a lot of people, when they see the price of gold go from 0 to $1 billion in German marks over 7 years, they think, oh, this is easy. All I need to do is open a leveraged long gold position and I'm going to make absolute bank. But what they don't miss is all of those leveraged traders would have got absolutely wiped out during those 7 years due to the volatility associated with these moves. And that is something you see in hyperinflationary events, okay? Here's another chart of the price of gold in German marks, and you can see every single small dip or small correction along the way. You would obviously have all of your Keynesian economists and your government officials trot out and say, look, prices are about to normalize. They're about to go back to normal. This is the end of inflation. You could continue storing your savings in German marks. Does that not sound familiar to what we're seeing around the world today? As most people think inflation has peaked at 9.1% in the US, it's down in the 6s, and most people think, oh, this is, the return to normal, prices are going back to, this stable 2% inflation mark, and that is simply not the case in my opinion, okay? So naturally, if things are going to continue to get more and more volatile in the fiat world, the way you protect yourself is to hold the least volatile asset, and that, of course, is Bitcoin. Bitcoin is the most boring asset there is in the world. It's done nothing for the past 13 years. It hasn't changed. Every 10 minutes, there's a new Bitcoin block put out there onto the network, and the rules haven't changed in 13 years. That is not true in the fiat system, as we're watching the rules being rewritten nearly on a yearly basis, and the closer we get to the government becoming more and more bankrupt, the more volatile and the more draconian their laws and regulations are going to be. So holding money in a bank where you have counterparty risk is probably not going to be the best idea over the next decade, because something we didn't explore in great detail in today's video was in all of these hyperinflationary events, governments got extraordinarily tyrannical. We obviously saw all sorts of capital controls. People had money frozen and taken out of their banks, like what just happened last week in Lebanon, and like what is happening right now in Nigeria. If you have more than 125 bucks in the bank in Nigeria, sorry, you can't get that out. You can only convert that to CBDC. which obviously stands for a central bank digital currency, also known as surveillance coin or slave money. Okay, you do not want to have that happen to your savings. So the takeaway from this video is you should probably get off zero. Okay, if you have no Bitcoin, that's probably a risky financial decision to be making right now. Many people will say gold could act as a store of value over the next 5 years. Sure, that's a possibility. Gold's actually underperformed the M2 money supply since 2011. I'm a little bit more bullish on Bitcoin myself, especially considering the fact it's at the very early stages of its adoption curve. But that's pretty much all I've got for you guys today. If you enjoyed this one, I'm going to slap another 2 videos up on screen in a moment that you might enjoy. I want to quickly thank today's show sponsors before we round this thing out. Obviously, guys, if you want better videos over here on YouTube, feel free to support the show sponsors who make these videos possible and help improve the content over here on YouTube. We're talking about Swan Bitcoin, best place to DCA and buy your Bitcoin in America. We're talking about the Foundation Passport hardware wallet. You can check those guys out and get $10 off one of those with a promo code BEAST. And finally, the Bitcoin Miami 2023 conference. You guys can get 10% off your tickets if you use promo code CoinBeast. Links to all of the amazing Bitcoin only show sponsors will be in the description of today's video. And with all that said, I hope you guys have a good day, and I'll see you all in the next video.